Chapter 2: The Cult-like Influence of Social Media and the Estrangement Epidemic. The suspicious similarity of estrangement stories. Have you noticed something odd? I find it very strange that parents worldwide are hearing the exact same phrases from their estranged children. Words like toxic, boundaries, emotional abuse, and narcissistic pop up so often it's like they're reading from a script. I mean, how weird is it that adult children from totally different backgrounds, cultures, and geographic locations all use identical language to justify cutting off their parents? Researchers call this concept contagion or mimetic spread of terminology. A fascinating study from 2023 found that specific psychological terms have shot up by over 300% in online discussions about family estrangement since 2015. What's interesting is that these terms started in therapy offices but are now being tossed around and often misused by non-professionals, especially on social media. So you have to wonder, is social media driving this? In my honest opinion, absolutely yes. It's become almost like a sick badge of honor to announce you've gone no contact with your parents, with online echo chambers reinforcing negative feelings toward parents. Don't just take my word for it. A comprehensive 2024 analysis looked at 52 different studies and discovered something troubling. People who frequently engage with estrangement-focused content are 47% more likely to consider cutting off their own family members. That's not coincidence. That's influence. How social media fuels the blame game. You've probably seen them, those self-proclaimed experts and coaches all over social media pushing a simple, seductive message. If your adult life isn't perfect, blame your parents. Feeling shy? Your parents were too critical. Can't seem to follow through or adult properly? Your parents were helicopter parents. No friends? Your parents must have been overprotective. It's so much easier to blame parents for everything than to consider other explanations. Maybe someone's shy because that's simply their personality. Maybe they don't follow through because they're lazy and unmotivated. Maybe they struggle with friendships because, let's face it, they're an asshole. These explanations aren't as satisfying as parent blaming, but they're often closer to reality. Here's what the research actually tells us. A 2023 analysis of popular TikTok and Instagram accounts focused on family estrangement found that over 70% of viral content blames adult psychological struggles primarily on parents, with hardly any mention of other factors like genetics, friends, economic conditions, or just plain individual differences. This totally contradicts what science actually tells us, which is that most psychological traits come from a complex mix of many different influences. Twin and adoption studies consistently show that about 40 to 60% of personality traits are genetic, with the remaining differences coming from a combination of family environment and experiences outside the family. So a huge chunk of who you are was determined by your genes, not your parents' behavior. The Estranged Children's Scripted Playbook. As we've discussed the suspicious similarity of estrangement stories, it's worth taking a closer look at what I call the Estranged Children's Scripted Playbook, the remarkably consistent language and narrative frameworks used to vilify parents. Understanding these scripts can help you recognize when your adult child has fallen under the influence of estrangement culture rather than expressing genuine, independent grievances. The terminology red flags. Pay attention to the sudden appearance of clinical or therapeutic terminology that wasn't previously part of your adult child's vocabulary. A 2023 linguistic analysis by Dr. Jennifer Michaels tracked communication patterns in 200 families before and after estrangement, finding that 84% of estranged adult children abruptly adopted specific psychological terminology within 3 to 6 months before cutting contact. The most common terms included toxic, perhaps the most overused and least defined term in the estrangement lexicon. A 2024 content analysis of estrangement forums found that the word toxic appeared in 91% of estrangement narratives, yet when researchers asked participants to define the term, definitions varied wildly and often included normal parental behaviors like setting rules as a teenager or asking about my day too often. Narcissistic, a clinical term now stripped of its diagnostic meaning. Dr. Eliza Thornfield's 2023 study of online estrangement communities found that narcissistic was used to describe parents in 87% of posts, despite fewer than 6% of the general population meeting the clinical criteria for narcissistic personality disorder. When asked to define narcissism, most forum users provided definitions that would apply to virtually any imperfect parent. Boundaries, a therapeutic concept that's been weaponized beyond recognition. In its clinical use, boundaries are mutual agreements that facilitate healthy relationships. In estrangement rhetoric, boundaries often mean one-sided demands with no reciprocity. A 2024 comparative study found that estranged adult children were 3 times more likely to use the term boundaries to mean non-negotiable rules others must follow, rather than mutual agreements that respect both parties' needs. Emotional abuse, what began as a term for serious psychological harm, has expanded to include normal parental mistakes. Research by Dr. Thomas Wells found that 72% of estrangement forums included posts categorizing acts like being late to pick me up from school or not celebrating my achievements the way I wanted as forms of emotional abuse, a dramatic departure from clinical definitions. Gaslighting, originally referring to a systematic campaign to make someone doubt their sanity, this term is now applied to any disagreement about past events. A 2023 media analysis found a 670% increase in the use of this term in estrangement contexts, with examples as minor as, "My mother remembered the cake at my 10th birthday being chocolate when it was actually vanilla." Triggered, a term from trauma therapy that's expanded to describe normal emotional reactions to disagreement. Researcher Dr. Amanda Chen found that 63% of estranged adult children in her study used triggered to describe normal emotional responses to parental communication, effectively shutting down any possibility of dialogue. No contact, the valorization of complete estrangement as a heroic act of self-care rather than a last resort. A 2024 algorithm analysis of social media platforms found that posts mentioning going no contact received 340% more positive engagement than posts about working through family conflict, creating powerful social reinforcement for estrangement. The narrative frameworks. Beyond specific terminology, there are several narrative frameworks that appear with remarkable consistency across estrangement stories. These aren't just similar stories, they are often identical structures with only the details changed. The awakening narrative. I always felt something was wrong, but I couldn't name it until I found therapist/forum/book that helped me see I was being abused all along. A 2023 discourse analysis found this exact narrative structure in 76% of estrangement stories, often using nearly identical phrasing across completely unrelated individuals. The escalation script. When I started setting boundaries, my toxic parent escalated their abuse, proving I was right all along. Dr. Michael's longitudinal research found that this specific narrative appeared in 81% of estrangement cases, regardless of what the parent's actual response had been. In some documented cases, even parents who completely respected the stated boundaries were still accused of escalation. The pathologization framework. Everything I struggle with as an adult, anxiety, relationship problems, career difficulties, is because of my parents' emotional neglect. A 2023 study in the Journal of Family Psychology found that 88% of estrangement narratives attributed all adult difficulties exclusively to parenting, despite robust psychological research showing that adult outcomes are influenced by numerous factors, including genetics, peer relationships, economic conditions, and individual choices. The purity test. Anyone who suggests reconciliation or forgiveness doesn't understand abuse and is enabling my abuser. Content analysis of estrangement forums found that 92% of posts responding to suggestions of possible reconciliation used this exact framing, effectively creating an unfalsifiable position where any questioning of the estrangement narrative is portrayed as further abuse. The reverse victim narrative. My parent crying or expressing hurt about estrangement is actually manipulation and proof of their toxicity. A 2024 study of estrangement forum responses found that 84% of discussions about parental grief were reframed as evidence of emotional manipulation, creating a catch-22 where parents are condemned both for showing emotion, manipulative, and for not showing emotion, cold and uncaring. What this means for parents. When you suddenly hear your adult child using this scripted language and narrative frameworks, especially if they never spoke this way before, understand that you're likely not dealing with their authentic voice, but rather with the influence of estrangement culture. A 2023 interview study with adult children who had temporarily estranged and later reconciled found that 72% reported feeling almost like I was in a cult during their estrangement period, describing how they had adopted language and beliefs from online communities rather than forming their own conclusions. This doesn't mean every grievance is fictional, but when the language becomes formulaic and adopts these specific patterns, it suggests external influence rather than genuine, independent processing of the relationship. The research suggests that responding to these scripts with defense or counterarguments is largely futile. As Dr. Wilson notes in his 2024 study on reconciliation patterns, when an estranged adult child is in the script phase, logical responses or evidence actually reinforce their narrative rather than challenging it. The most effective approach is often non-engagement until they've moved beyond the scripted thinking. Your best response is to recognize the script, avoid getting pulled into its internal logic, and maintain your own emotional equilibrium while leaving the door open for genuine dialogue if your adult child moves beyond these predetermined narratives. Understanding mass psychosis in social media. Let's talk about something called mass psychosis. Mass psychosis happens when a large group of people adopt beliefs or behaviors that, honestly, don't make much rational sense. These beliefs spread through collective fear, panic, or misinformation. Think of it as a group delusion, where social pressure causes people to think or act in ways they normally wouldn't. Think of Nazi Germany. While mass psychosis isn't an official clinical term, social psychologists use concepts like emergent norm theory to explain how groups can quickly adopt extreme beliefs. A 2022 study looked at TikTok's algorithm and found something alarming. It creates ideological bubbles that can accelerate radical viewpoints, pushing users toward increasingly extreme content in as little as 4 to 6 hours of scrolling. Scary, right? In the context of social media, several factors fuel this phenomenon. Misinformation spreads like wildfire, creating false narratives that quickly become accepted as truth. Peer pressure encourages conformity. Echo chambers ensure people only see viewpoints that reinforce what they already believe. And emotionally charged content bypasses critical thinking, making people more vulnerable to manipulation. Brain science backs this up too. Neuroscience research shows that emotional content activates the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, while simultaneously decreasing activity in your prefrontal cortex, which handles rational thinking. This emotional hijacking makes you more susceptible to suggestion, especially when it comes through engaging short-form videos like those on TikTok or Instagram. For adult children estranging themselves from parents, social media platforms become spaces where they find communities that reinforce extreme beliefs or validate their negative feelings. These online groups perpetuate toxic ideas about family dynamics, promoting the belief that cutting ties with parents is not just okay but necessary for personal growth or self-preservation. The cult-like behavior of online estrangement communities. Have you ever noticed how cult-like some online groups can be? Just as cults promote extreme beliefs and isolate members from different opinions, social media groups create echo chambers where people are constantly exposed to the same narratives. Here are the key elements of cult-like behavior I've noticed in these communities. Black and white thinking. Parents are either toxic or not, with zero room for gray areas or middle ground. Isolation from opposing viewpoints. Any defensive parents or suggestion of reconciliation gets immediately shot down. Special language and terminology. Specific vocabulary like going no contact and setting boundaries creates an in-group identity. Reinforcement through group validation. Praise and support for cutting off family, creating a reward system for estrangement. Unquestioning acceptance of the group's narrative. Critical thinking about one's own situation is actively discouraged. Dr. Stephen Hassan's BITE model, Behavior, Information, Thought, and Emotional Control, offers a framework for identifying manipulative group dynamics. A 2024 analysis of 15 popular estrangement-focused online communities found that 11 exhibited at least 6 of the 8 thought control elements from Hassan's model, including loaded language, thought-stopping techniques, and rejection of critical thinking about the group's core beliefs. Content analysis of estrangement forums reveals language patterns remarkably similar to those found in religious conversion stories, including awakening terminology, before/after identity reconstruction, and ritualistic sharing of testimonials that follow highly consistent narrative structures despite participants coming from diverse backgrounds. These groups often reinforce a one-size-fits-all solution, suggesting that cutting ties with a parent is the only way to handle personal struggles. This simplistic narrative ignores the complexities of real-life family relationships, painting parents as villains in a way that just doesn't reflect reality. How social media amplifies and distorts grievances. Social media doesn't just connect like-minded people, it fundamentally changes how we perceive our own experiences. When adult children engage with online groups that encourage them to view their parents through a lens of blame or victimhood, it changes their perception of their relationships. Over time, this can lead to estrangement as influencers or like-minded peers encourage cutting off toxic family members as some sort of heroic act of self-care. A 2023 longitudinal study tracked 350 young adults over 3 years, measuring their engagement with family-critical content on social media. The researchers found that increased consumption of such content correlated with growing negative reinterpretations of childhood memories. Most concerning, participants reported significantly higher numbers of recovered memories of parental abuse that coincided with their deepening involvement in online estrangement communities, a pattern that raises serious concerns about false memory formation. The constant stream of similar opinions can reinforce and solidify the idea of estrangement, making it harder for individuals to break free from the cycle of belief that social media has created. Minor grievances or normal parental mistakes become magnified and reinterpreted as abuse when viewed through this distorted lens. The impact on parents. scapegoated, stigmatized, and systematically silenced. What happens to the parents in all this? They're often left isolated and confused, with no opportunity to defend themselves or explain the nuances of their actions and intentions. Many parents are being wrongfully labeled as toxic when they've simply made ordinary mistakes or had misunderstandings with their children, the kind of things that happen in any relationship. A 2024 survey of 1,200 estranged parents found that 78% reported experiencing symptoms of complex trauma, with 43% meeting diagnostic criteria for PTSD. The majority, 67%, reported having no clear understanding of why estrangement occurred, with many citing a sudden shift in their child's perspective that coincided with increased social media usage or new relationship influences. The silencing campaign, when estranged parents dare to speak. What makes this situation even more disturbing is how estranged parents are systematically bullied and silenced when they try to speak up. In online forums and social media spaces, if parents attempt to defend themselves or offer their perspective, they're immediately attacked by what I can only describe as a lynch mob. These parents are accused of playing the victim or exhibiting narcissistic behavior simply for trying to tell their side of the story. What we're witnessing against parents who share their estrangement experiences online isn't just disagreement. It's a coordinated campaign of intimidation and bullying designed to eliminate their voices completely. Case in point, a mother created a YouTube channel to offer support to other heartbroken parents of estranged adult children. But instead of simple criticism, she became the target of a coordinated campaign of bullying and harassment. Organized groups mobilized to mass report her videos with false claims of abuse, flooded her comment sections with vitriol, and even targeted her business and reputation offline. This wasn't about disagreement or debate. It was about silencing her completely and erasing her perspective from public view. And she's not alone. Other parents who have dared to speak publicly about their estrangement experiences have faced similar tactics, relentless efforts to discredit, bully, intimidate, and ultimately shut them down. Analysis of comment sections on TikTok videos about family estrangement shows a clear pattern. When self-identified parents speak up, they're 11 times more likely to get hostile replies than supportive ones. The most common response accuses them of being narcissists, and the so-called proof is simply that they tried to defend themselves. It's the kind of accusation you can't win, because even standing up for yourself is used as evidence against you. This bullying and silencing tactic serves a clear purpose. It prevents any fair discussion that might expose the flaws in the estrangement narrative. By labeling any parental defense as further evidence of toxicity, these online communities create a perfect trap. Speak up and you prove their point. Remain silent and the accusations stand unchallenged. The reversal of power dynamics. This reflects a deeply troubling pattern in our discourse about family estrangement. One side has claimed absolute moral authority and works aggressively to ensure no alternative narratives can exist. The message is clear: you don't deserve to speak about your own experiences. What makes this particularly insidious is how it recasts the actual power dynamic. Those engaging in this harassment and bullying campaign simultaneously claim victim status while wielding collective power to silence individuals who are already experiencing profound loss and isolation. These tactics mirror other forms of coordinated digital harassment where vulnerable voices are systematically removed from public conversation through intimidation rather than authentic engagement with their perspective. It represents a fundamental threat to the ability of estranged parents to process their grief publicly, seek support, or advocate for recognition of their experiences. Professional reinforcement of silencing. The silencing of parents isn't limited to online spaces. In a troubling development, a 2023 study of training materials for family therapists found that 73% of recently published resources presumptively frame parents as the primary cause of family dysfunction in estrangement cases, often encouraging therapists to validate adult children's narratives without equal exploration of parental perspectives, a significant shift from the family systems approach that dominated therapeutic training a decade ago. This professional bias means that even when parents seek help from mental health professionals, they often encounter the same one-sided narrative that dominates social media. Their perspectives are deemed suspect from the start, their pain minimized, and their desire for reconciliation pathologized as boundary violations rather than natural parental love. When we see parents being silenced through these tactics, we must recognize it for what it is, a deliberate effort to control the narrative by eliminating all contradictory voices, regardless of the additional trauma inflicted on already suffering individuals. This systematic silencing doesn't just hurt individual parents, it impoverishes our collective understanding of family dynamics and prevents the development of more effective healing approaches that might honor the experiences and needs of all family members. Breaking free from the cycle. So how do we break free from this cycle? The first step is recognizing the influence of mass psychosis and cult-like group behavior that social media platforms can amplify. For estranged parents, it's important to question the narratives you encounter online and approach social media with a critical eye. Remember that your worth isn't defined by the opinions of online communities or your estranged children. Parents navigating estrangement need to recognize that the false narratives pushed by certain social media groups don't reflect the full truth of their experiences. It's empowering to know that you're not alone and that your love, care, and efforts as a parent have value, regardless of the accusations or judgments you may face online. Moving beyond the blame game. Mass psychosis fueled by social media's cult-like behavior creates false dichotomies in family dynamics, leading to the unjust estrangement of parents who have done nothing wrong. It's essential to raise awareness about these dynamics and provide support for parents who are unfairly targeted. By fostering a more compassionate, understanding approach, we can challenge the narrative that places all the blame on parents and instead work towards solutions that acknowledge the complexity of family relationships. Most importantly, as estranged parents, we can refuse to accept the villain role that social media has cast us in, and instead focus on healing ourselves and building fulfilling lives despite the pain of estrangement.